Hey, my. It's been a while. And I know you've been on the road a bit since we last chatted. Are you finally allowed to stay in Holiday Inns again?
Yeah, the ban has been lifted.
That is good news. Um, and so I've, as usual, been spending my time watching music documentaries, mainly on Canopy for the past few weeks.
Oh, they rocked Canopy.
Yes. Actually, that's a good name for a band. Um, but what have you been listening to?
Um, well, I've been listening to a lot of stuff as usual. Right now, I am going through a bit of a John Prine phase. Um, I have a bunch of his records, and I have never really delved into him that deeply, but I am now, and man, he was good. Such a great songwriter.
One of the best songwriters ever. Because he writes like I'll read his lyrics and like there are some lyrics I could write. I could write "She Loves You" by the Beatles. I could have written that. Like there are definitely songs where I'm like, oh, I could have written that. Even songs I like, even songs I think are really good. But his songs, when I look at the lyrics, I'm like, there's no way I could have written that. Like, and he said that Belushi always wanted to get him on Saturday Night Live. And so
Mhm.
every time any band canceled, like he would say, "How about John Prine? How about John Prine?" And finally, the Beach Boys did cancel, and he got his one chance to be on Saturday Night Live, and so he always thanked Belushi for that.
That's an interesting anecdote. I had never heard that.
Yeah.
I would like to see that. I'm going to look that up on YouTube. Uh, and one of the things that I found or am finding so amazing about him is up until the very end, he was still putting out great records.
Yeah.
His very last record was called The Tree of Forgiveness. I think it came out in 2020 or thereabouts. And he was right on death's door. Even on the cover, he looks like, eh, for lack of a better description, he looks like a corpse on the
Yeah.
cover
He
almost.
aged. Yep.
He did, and it almost he's one of those guys who, assuming he did some pretty hard living, it really caught up with him, much like a Robert Plant. But with John Prine, boy, but I gotta say, that record might be one of my favorites of his. And this is a guy who put out probably 20 just excellent records. So that's one thing I've been listening to.
So he's the guy that my father and my sister really liked, and I discovered John Pine through them. Now, he's also got
Uh,
I never unfortunately I never got to see him live, but my sister did a few times, and he was definitely a hit or miss guy because he was a hard drinker, and so you didn't know what show we were going to get.
mm,
Was he going to show up ready to perform or just So
well,
with the replacements, that's part of the charm. With most
I was
other
just going to
artists,
say he was copying the replacements
yeah,
because I hear the replacements were a huge influence on
yeah.
John Prine.
I saw them twice. Both times they were all wasted. But I mean, you expect that with the replacements, that
Mhm.
is part of their thing. But with John Prine, like a singer-songwriter, if the person's like too drunk to hold it together, you know.
Um, the one time I saw the replacements, they were on their best behavior and put on a fantastic show from start to finish. It was at the Fillmore in San Francisco in '87. So I think that was their first tour without Bob Stinson. And it was, to use the term that's overused, it was workmanlike.
Yeah.
Good show, good show, but probably for them a little too workmanlike, where um, I was somewhat underwhelmed by the show. I mean, it was fine, it was good, and it was cool to see the replacements. But anyway,
Yeah, when I saw them, I think in '85 is when I saw them both times, and but then I saw Paul Westerberg solo a few years later, and that was a much different show. Paul Westerberg was definitely far more professional as a solo artist than
much more
it.
boring too.
Yeah. I mean, I liked the show, but yeah, it was not the same thing. So
Another thing, or another artist I've been listening to. So I've been listening to a lot of old school country. Um, Man, there's a real sweet spot for me from about 65 to 75. There's the obvious heavyweights like Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, Johnny Cash, Merle Haggard, all that stuff I've always liked, and I still do like it a lot. You could grab a record from that decade from 65 to 75 by any of those guys, and I'm going to like it. The production values on those records, I always just love. They always are such good sounding, well recorded and well mastered records. The musicians are like the most seasoned, skillful country musicians ever. But there's a couple other people in there that I've been checking out recently. One is who you're probably quite familiar with because he's from your town, in fact, or he was, is Jerry Jeff Walker. Um, I don't know if you've checked out any of his full length records in depth, but man, they're good.
Yeah,
Might be my favorite country artist right now.
interesting. My college roommate really liked Jerry Jeff Walker, and I was definitely at a different place musically at the time. And so he'd play him, and it just didn't do anything for me. I'd have to really go back and give him another listen. In I'm a big country music fan, as I think you know, but mine would actually be a decade before the what you're talking about. Like I'm a
55 to 65.
Yeah, and even maybe even a little bit before then, I'm a big Patsy
Hmm.
Cline fan. I'm a big George Jones fan.
Hmm.
Hank Snow, Hank Williams. I really like that stuff quite a bit. Um,
I like
and then
that a
Buck
lot
Owens
as
later on.
well,
So
for sure. But for me, that the artists, like a lot of those artists who you just mentioned, are on my list recently. Like I just picked up a Hank Snow record from 1972, and I'd never really given Hank Snow the time of
yeah,
day.
I'm sure. Yeah,
And goddamn if it isn't a great record, you know?
and
Conway
that's
Twitty
it.
as another one. I mean, I wouldn't have been caught dead listening to Conway Twitty when I
Yeah,
was 18,
yeah.
but God, I picked up a bunch of his records lately, again from that sweet spot, and they're great, great country records.
And that's where, so one of the things I used to get was I used to get collections. And like not somewhat not really greatest hits, but just like a collection of various artists and all. And that
Hmm.
was always a great introduction point because then I'd listen and go, oh, okay, I gotta listen to more Buck Owens, or I gotta listen to more Conway Twitty, or I gotta listen to more, Patsy Cline. And then, oh, I don't really like believe it or not the biggest Willie Nelson fan. And so
Yeah, I
I've
remember you
tried.
saying that.
Yeah. And so that was one where like, okay, that's not my thing. His voice just doesn't do it for me. And so those collections were a great way to start because then I could then branch out and get other records. I had a great record called The King and the Queen, which was George Jones on one album and Tammy Wynette on the other album. And,
Hmm.
and it was terrific. I'm a big Tammy Wynette fan as well.
So me too, and I have a bunch of their records when they were a duo.
Yeah.
As you just mentioned, they were a duo for a long time, and they probably have, I don't know, maybe 20 records
Yeah.
that are under both of their names, and they're all really good. And in fact, speaking of music docs, you had mentioned earlier, there's that series. I think it's about 7 or 8 episodes long. That's called George and Tammy.
I tried to
Have you
watch
seen
it.
it?
I tried. I watched the
Yeah, you
first 3 episodes maybe, and I just it just
didn't
didn't
do it
work for me.
for you.
Yeah.
Um, okay, I would suggest, well, at 3 episodes, that's pretty good. You gave it a pretty good
That's the
run.
thing. It's like,
I liked it, and it
yeah,
was I went into it expecting to be quite disappointed, but I thought it was pretty good.
I didn't think it
And
was bad. It just didn't work for me. So
Yeah, yeah, I could see that. It didn't blow my mind or anything, and it was a pretty standard uh, music biopic. I mean, it went through all the typical paces of that sort of thing. But I thought the performances, in particular, Jessica Chastain
yeah,
as Tammy Wynette, that actually kind of blew my mind because apparently they both did their own singing, and Michael Shannon, who played
yeah,
George Jones, at
yeah,
first it, I couldn't get into it because he didn't physically resemble George
right.
Jones. He's like this big sort sort of Frankenstein looking guy. I mean,
Yeah,
come on, he
yeah,
kind of is. He's got the biggest head on the planet, Michael
yes.
Shannon, and I love him as an actor. He's probably one of my favorite contemporary ones actors. But after a few episodes, I started buying it a bit more. Him as George Jones, and
And
quite
part of
enjoyed it. In fact.
part of my problem with Michael Shannon is that I watched him and enjoyed him quite a bit on Boardwalk Empire.
Hmm.
And it's such a different thing. And I really identified him with, like bootleggers in the 1920s and, and that it was hard for me to then see him in a different role
Hmm.
because he doesn't have, as you said, the sort of face and body which can just blend from one role to another. The way Jessica Chastain can. I've seen her in a few different things, and she can do, a whole bunch of different
Anything.
things. Yeah,
She's kind of astonishing as
yeah,
an actress.
yeah.
She can really pretty anything I've seen her in. It's like she's kind of blown me away, I got to say,
So
with
like, so I
her
really enjoyed her
skill.
in the Martian, but I didn't think of that once as I watched, you know, the George and Tammy thing because it was a totally different character. But with him, I just had a hard time, getting away from seeing him as that other character. So,
Hmm.
and
Um,
also, I would say that you're more of a fan of biopics than I am. It's why I watch documentaries and not so much biopics.
yeah, the biopics are really hard to pull off. They are, especially if it's an artist that we're intimately familiar with.
Yeah,
Like anytime, oh, I don't know, there was a Sex Pistols um, limited series
yeah,
from a year or two ago. I just knew that would be a piece of shit, and I didn't even check it out because there's just no way that isn't going to just be outright offensive to somebody like you or me who um, are very familiar with the Sex Pistols and that whole era and everything. And there's just no way you can do that. You can't pull it off. It's not transferable to the big screen, much like comic books are not transferable to the big screen. I think it's sort of a similar thing.
yeah, and it's why I've certainly seen far more of the comic book movies than you have, but out of however there may have been, let's say 40, I would say three or four are good.
And
Because
that's being kind.
those are the three or four that managed to make it work. And same thing with biopics. Most biopics I've seen suck. Um,
Yeah.
I Walk the
Like,
Line is one of the few ones I actually liked, but most I would say. Hey, whereas a documentary, even a documentary that's like I just watched one on Canopy, Brian Jones and the Rolling Stones, and
yeah,
it is not a great documentary. Okay, but it's
yeah,
got so much footage that I'd never seen before.
I saw it. Yeah.
Okay, and so that was enjoyable just for that. And so that's the thing about a documentary; it can get by even, without being a great documentary. As opposed to the one I saw on the Magnetic Fields, which was quite a good documentary. I'm a big
It's on my
Magnetic Fields
list.
fan. So,
Me too. Me
are you?
too. Like them very. Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Like them very
I was
much.
I was not aware.
69 love songs.
Yep. And
Um,
Kim was the one who turned me on to them, and I actually like the albums after that even better. And then we saw them two or three times, and they're quite good live.
mm,
I really like them quite a bit. And it's funny because like th they're a hard band to describe to someone and to get someone to like, oh, you got to check these guys out. Okay, it's a guitar and a cello and a keyboard, and then a guy who's very, you know, not morose, but like, Stephen Merritt is not Bruce Springsteen. And so,
yeah, or he's not prancing around like a
yeah,
young Mick Jagger.
yeah,
That's for
or
sure.
Prince. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
it's interesting. It makes sense actually that you would be one of the people who would enjoy them. So,
They're a recent band that I've gotten into over the last few years, and I have, I don't know, maybe three, four records by them, including that 69 love songs,
yeah,
which ironically is a record with 69 songs on it, and they're all love songs.
yeah,
Go figure.
yeah.
And the version I have is 6 10-inch pieces of vinyl. That's so it's like a little box set.
Got it.
And anyway, I quite enjoy that. Circling back though,
Yeah,
um, to Jerry Jeff Walker. So to your point about your old roommate exposed you to him back in the day, he's another example. Not that whole genre of music I never would have given the time of day in the younger years. But uh, you listen to it now, 30, 40 years later, and everything has changed, and you're, at least for me, way more open-minded to different types of music and what have you.
sure.
But I would recommend two records to check
Okay.
out if you're interested. One is called Walker's Collectibles,
Okay.
and that's how I got into him, actually. My cousin Greg at one of my music nights brought that record over, and I'd never really listened to any of his records. Loved that record, so I've been buying others. Another one is called um, "Too Old to Change," which is the whole record's great, but I just love the title song, which "Too Old to Change" just says a lot about being this age.
Yeah.
around this age. And he was probably only 40 years, 35 when that record came out. And I think it only gets stronger as you hit the early 60s. We truly are, pretty much too old to
Yeah.
change
Well,
at this
that's why I
point.
like the Rick Derringer song "Still Alive and Well." Uh,
Uh,
every now and then, it's kind of hard to tell, but I'm still alive and well. But yeah, so as in college, I'm listening to X and to The Clash and a lot of, but then a lot of new wave stuff like Duran Duran and all. And so like Jerry Jeff Walker,
oh, you
like
admit that.
what Duran
Duran
Duran?
Duran.
I love Duran Duran. Their
I'm
first two albums.
just giving you
Okay,
shit.
yeah. I saw them, but unfortunately I saw them late. But they were still good. Um, but so like I remember Howard and I would also listen to Simon and Garfunkel and stuff like that. But that stuff I'd already listened to, so it didn't have to like sneak in the way Jerry Jeff
Wasn't new
Walker would
to
have.
you at that
Yeah,
point.
but he also turned me on to Kate Bush, and I really like Kate Bush. So
Uh-huh.
she was great. So not
So
not every album, but her she had a run where it's really good. So
sure, sure. Yeah, big fan myself. When we first started doing these little chats
yeah,
and recording them,
that was you.
one of huh?
That was
That was
you.
me?
Yeah,
Yeah, that was me.
yeah.
One of the things
I knew you looked
we
familiar.
one of the things we did was we talked about some of the notable deaths of the prior year,
Yep.
notable in the music world. So I was thinking maybe we could touch base on some of the people who died in 2024.
And so recently, David Johansen.
That's 2025.
But let me just make one note on David Johansen, then we'll move back to
Sure,
2024,
sure,
which is so I saw him, my brother, sister, and I, and our significant others saw him on a booze cruise in Boston. This is after the days of the Dolls, and I
sure.
think after Buster Poindexter, or it was in between. I can't remember, but
Uh-huh.
but we met him, and he was extremely nice, and he was funny. He said, because I'll never forget him saying, "This is like the Love Boat," and I'm like Julie, your cruise director. And I just like if you ever seen him in Scrooged, where he plays the ghost of Christmas Past, he was
I
that sort of
haven't.
okay. He was that sort of guy in person, and he was just very likable. Normally, when a musician dies, I'm like, oh, that's too bad. That one I felt a little bad. So,
Yeah, for sure. Me
and
too.
but he was the last doll. They all had died already. So,
Yeah, yeah. It's
outliving
weird.
Johnny Thunders is no big medal, though.
But outliving Arthur Killer Kane,
Yes.
boy, that's a stretch. It's just it's interesting to see all of these people who are in the music world that we admire, just dying left and right. When you look at a band like, you know, the New York Dolls, for example,
Yeah.
all of them dead.
Yeah.
The Ramones, all
The
of them dead.
the band.
Yeah, the band, all of them dead.
Yeah.
Um, MC5 with the death of Wayne Kramer last year, all of
But
them dead, and he's on my list. Do you want to touch base on some of these? I,
sure.
I jotted
Yeah.
down a list of
Yep. Yep.
some
Go.
that might be somewhat meaningful to
Yep.
you and or me. Uh, let's see. David Soul.
Yes. I don't think he'll be remembered as much as a musician as a TV detective, but as you know, I had this single "Don't Give Up on Us." Um,
Yeah, he
I,
had he had a very big music career. He had, I think, at least a couple top 10 hits
well,
back in the
that one
day.
was a top 10 hit. Um,
And there was another one or two, and that was back in the day when if you had a top 10 hit, you were making some serious cash for
but
the most part,
but you
you know.
definitely he had a huge advantage being Hutch from Starsky and
Oh, of
Hutch,
course.
so
Yeah, I wasn't making a
yeah,
case for the quality of
yeah.
his
No,
music.
I still liked it because I like pop music.
He
But
was
do you know who
he was
played?
barely better than John Travolta in that arena.
I had that one too. Do you know who played piano though for David Soul?
Um, on his records.
Yeah,
Geez, couldn't have been a young Billy Joel.
Nicky Hopkins.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
he played on everything. So
Yes, he
there you
played for the
go.
Stones and the Kinks and the Who and David Soul.
Um, This next one is surprisingly a big one for me, and she's somebody who I've gotten into recently. Again, never in a million years would I have been caught dead listening to her back in the day, but I'm telling you, her records are really, really fucking good, and that's Melanie of all people.
And I only know she had one hit single back in the 70s, and I can't remember the title. Like that's all
Well,
I know.
she had a couple,
Okay.
and
Was it Brand New Pair of Roller Skates or something like
a
that? Was that her?
brand new
Brand
key
New
is
Key.
the name
Okay,
of the
yeah.
song, and
That
that has special resonance, or it resonates with me because when I was a little kid, my mom used to sing that song to me, and that was kind of out of her wheelhouse, singing songs to me, and she's too busy raising three kids and trying to scrape up scrape a living, scrape by making a living. Um, so that was my initial introduction to her. And at that point, I'm like 6 years old, 7 years old. But yeah, that was her biggest hit single and a kind of a novelty single.
yeah.
But she had a couple other hits during
Okay.
that era that were big pop singles. And she also performed at Woodstock. And she's when you think of Woodstock, you don't think of Melanie, that's for sure.
No,
But
definitely. Excuse me.
here's the craziest thing, or what I found really interesting. She has this record called Garden in the City, and
Okay.
it was released after a little bit after her heyday of popularity. And I'm telling you, Sinead O'Connor must have listened to this record, and it must have been an influence on her because it sounds like Sinead O'Connor at times, the way she phrases things and the way she sings. There's a great cover of Jigsaw Puzzle, the Stones
Yeah,
song
of
from
course. Yeah.
from
The
uh,
Beggar's
Beggar's
Banquet.
Banquet,
Yeah.
and I'm telling you, it is an excellent record. Garden in the City,
All right, I'll check that
and
out.
many of her other records have really have moments of brilliance on them, and
What made you give it a
it's
try?
just such a surprise. Sorry.
What made you like go and buy even one?
I found that record Garden in the City for like $1 somewhere. And I saw that Jigsaw Puzzle was
Okay,
on it.
got it. Yep.
And there's a couple other surprisingly cool covers on there too.
Yep.
But it's worth checking out
Okay.
if you're interested. Surprisingly good artist that I think was never really given her due because of, for example, the novelty single Brand New Key.
Yeah, and so I've never listened to Melanie.
Yeah, I
So
figured as much, but
yeah.
I figured I would bring her up and try and sell her to you.
Okay. No, and see that is the cool thing about Spotify or whatever other streaming services. When we're done, I'm gonna go listen to it. I'm certainly gonna
And
listen to Jigsaw Puzzle because
and
that's one of
and
my favorite Stone songs.
oh, then I'm curious to see what you think of it.
Yep.
So that's your homework
Yep.
until the next time
Yep. That.
we meet. I would love to hear what you think about that record.
Yep. We'll do.
Um,
I'll try to look past the fact that she's Canadian.
um, let's see. Oh, this was a huge one for me, or huge in the sense that I just liked this guy and his band. And I don't think you ever really listened to him, but this singer named Damo Suzuki, who
No.
was one of the singers for the German progressive rock band, kind of kind of the most prominent band in the whole krautrock world. The band Can. Um,
And I remember like the name, like strikes a bell, but other than that, that was never a genre I listened to at all.
yeah, and I figured as much. Uh, yeah, I don't even know if I would recommend you checking them out because I don't know. Maybe it's something that you might dig. But I think one of the greatest rock bands of all time, hands
Wow.
down, um, because they were so singular in their vision and the way they pursued it, and they really just didn't follow any typical um, blueprint or guidelines for rock music. And it because of that, they created just a lot of really great, unusual sounding music. And I mean, I guess it's still rock, but you do have to label it, I guess, as prog rock. And even krautrock is more typical. Krautrock basically was a label given to a band like Can. Um,
Kraftwerk.
Kraftwerk would be in there. Basically, this group of early 70s, late 60s, early 70s bands that came out of uh, shockingly for the name Krautrock came out of Germany.
Yeah,
And so as the music press likes to do, they slapped a label on all these bands
always. Yep.
and which was krautrock, and most of those bands are really good. Ashra Temple is another one. Amon Duel and Amon Duel 2. Those two
Don't know
bands
those.
were.
Okay.
But anyway, I know that's not necessarily an area of interest for you, but I like that stuff a lot, and a few of my friends like that stuff as well. In fact, we saw half of Damo Suzuki was one of about three three or four singers that Can had, but he's the most well-known one. He was this little Japanese guy who basically didn't have lyrics. He would just improvise over the music, which
Hmm.
was typically improvised.
Yep.
So it could be just really well. I guess one of their strengths was they never sounded jammy. You know how like a band like the Allman Brothers, to me, some of that stuff on Eat a Peach or Live at the Fillmore West, where they're just it's endless jamming. Sometimes that loses me, but Can had a way of circumventing sounding too jammy, even though like you listen to a live show and so much of it is improvising. It doesn't ever really come across as jammy and boring. So that was their real strength. And I think if you talk to Can fans, um, that's going to be one of the things they point out as, oh, that's what I loved about this band.
And let me stop and ask you a question because you were saying some of your friends like them as well. Did you at record night, did anyone ever bring a record and put it on and you were like, "Oh my God, I hate this."
Yeah, sure,
Mhm.
sure. Um, that would happen, and that was part of the fun, as
Did it turn
people
to a
bringing
brawl?
over stuff. Sorry.
Did it turn to a brawl?
Yeah, in fact, we would have fisticuffs would come
Yes.
out of that because I would insult something
Yeah.
somebody brought, and of course they would challenge me to a fight.
Yes. As you threw the
Oh,
disc, as you tore the disc off the turntable and threw it across the room.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But that really, that is part of the fun is as when you're introduced to new stuff, it could totally uh, appeal to you or not, and that's okay. That's
Ex
that's totally okay. I'm sure I played a lot of stuff for a lot of people who would come to those record nights who would think the same thing. Like there was a time where I would play, for at least one time, I didn't play anything but Lana Del Rey. And I could
hard,
just tell
hard to
people were
picture.
like, Jesus
Yeah.
Christ, not another song by
Yeah.
her. It
Yeah.
was right when I was getting into her and
Yeah.
really just, it's all I was listening to there for a little while. And
Yes.
I could see people rolling their
I
eyes.
do remember.
Yeah, yeah. That time you were out, I
Yep.
was
Yep.
trying to turn you on to some of her
Yes.
stuff too. So,
Um,
but that's part of the fun of it.
but my friend Greg, and I've mentioned this before, when we were in high school, our group either hung out at his house or my house. And there was one
Uh,
period of time where Greg decided he was a big record collector too. We all were, and he was going to play every album he had alphabetically.
oh
And
yeah, yeah.
so there were times where like whose house do you want to go to? And I try to think what letter are we at? Okay, no, I'm not going to Greg's house.
That's
It
funny.
it's whatever, I can't remember what letters were bad, but I knew because there's some stuff he really liked that.
So for him to work his way through everything from A to Z, he must not have had a gigantic collection.
Yeah, no, certainly nothing like yours. And we were high school kids, remember? So he had, I don't know,
Couple hundred probably, right?
500 records. I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
but that's still a bit of a journey.
Yeah. And so, and we also, would have several albums by one band or one artist. And so if you didn't like that artist, I didn't want to go to his house, like, and listen to nothing but that artist over and over.
Right.
He was a huge Little Feat fan. That was one of his bands. Huge Residents fan. Um,
Oh God, that's
yes,
like on the opposite ends of the spectrum.
yes, yep.
That would be a great bill. Little Feat opening for the Residents, or vice
Yes.
versa.
Yes, and I don't. He never saw either one live, as far as I know. So, um,
Um, Here's one that a death from
yep.
last year that I just have a sneaking suspicion. you heard about the great bass player from the Grateful Dead, Phil Lesh.
Yeah. And I've got friends, my brother-in-law is a much bigger Dead fan than I am, believe it or not.
Even though they're your favorite band,
Yeah. Okay. And so,
so
and
they're also his like favorite actors as well.
because because he would
Favorite soccer players.
go
Sorry.
see the offshoot bands.
Yeah,
He would
like
see Dead and Company and Rat Dog and stuff like that, and I
yeah,
just had no
yeah.
interest in that. So,
Gotcha.
and
And who's this, your brother-in-law?
yeah, my sister's husband,
Okay.
yeah,
Good.
Tony. And so and Phil Lesh wrote my sister's favorite Dead song, "Box of Rain," and so they're both they both took it harder. But again, I don't, for the most part, like I said, I don't take it hard. I'm like, people die. Like if some artist I really like dies at 21, I'm like, okay, that is sad. Okay, when people who've been in rock bands their whole life die, I'm like, about time. Yeah.
So, so to that comment, then you probably haven't been moping around the house all day because of a 95-year-old Gene Hackman just died.
Yeah, I mean, and people are like, well, what did he die of and all? And I'm like, well, he was
He was
95,
90
so
fucking five.
yeah,
What do you
yeah.
think he died of?
But the fact that his wife was dead and the dog was dead, and so they thought it was carbon monoxide poisoning. Then they've ruled that out. It
Yeah.
was Ben Stiller. Did you see the article he wrote in New York Times about when he was on when he did the World Tannenbaums with Gene
No,
Hackman?
I did
So
not see that.
so Ben Stiller was much younger then, okay, and he's doing this
I,
film
I
with Gene
remember the
Hackman.
movie.
Okay, and he's excited because Gene Hackman's on his Mount Rushmore of actors. Okay, he's a
Sure.
huge Gene Hackman fan, and he finally gets a moment where they're about to do a scene together, but they've got time before, and they're sitting down together. And he says, I don't want to bother you. I tell you, I'm a big fan, and he wants to let him know that, but he also knows that a million people have said this to Gene Hackman, and he says, and one of my favorite films of yours, or my favorite film of yours, and he can see Gene Hackman sort of anticipating where it's going, but he goes, it's the movie that got me into movies. I saw it 10 times when I was a kid and all. He goes, my favorite movie of yours of all time was The Poseidon Adventure. And Gene Hackman looks at him, grins, and says, "Money job." He gets up and walks away.
That's funny. But that shows you that we're about the same age as Ben Stiller
Yep.
because that movie was huge for me as a kid. I
Yep.
remember being over at my cousin's house watching it and just
Mm.
being just, just so enthralled by that
Yep.
movie and Gene Hackman's performance in it as he was the badass reverend who
Yep.
basically saved everybody.
Yep.
And if you're of our age, that movie does have a lot of meaning to you. We didn't understand the ins and outs and the something like French Connection is not going to resonate with 7 and 8 year olds like the Poseidon Adventure
Yeah, no,
would.
and that was the era of the Poseidon Adventure, the Towering Inferno, Airport,
Earthquake,
yeah, Earthquake, yeah, and so
yeah,
like,
the Irwin Allen
yeah,
disaster movie,
yeah.
which was a whole genre, and that was basically firmly in play. Remember the one called Roller Coaster with George
Oh yeah, with
Siegel?
George Siegel. Yep,
Yeah,
someone's planting bombs in the roller coasters.
yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, Tower
Uh,
Inferno had Steve McQueen and Paul Newman. I mean,
oh yeah, yeah.
big actors
Well,
were doing these films. You know?
you know what Hackman would say about those
Yes,
guys.
yes.
Funny job. That's so great. That's funny. That's really funny.
So
Um, okay. So I back to Phil Lesh.
yeah,
Um,
he was
so
classically trained and didn't really want to play rock music, and sort of reluctantly went into it with the Dead. Um,
uh,
and very
and
very talented bass player. Um,
so what was the whole? I remember when I was in San Francisco, I had a one set of friends who were all big Deadheads, and I remember I used to see buttons that said "Let Phil sing,"
yeah,
and I was always kind of wondering what the deal was with that. Was that as simple as people wanted Phil to sing more songs?
yeah, or to get to sing those few songs that he did. Yeah. So, um,
And
keep,
so the songs that he wrote, would he sing them
yeah,
typically?
yeah, typically not, maybe always. He didn't write that many. So, and once again, this is the sort of stuff Tony, my brother-in-law, would know much better than me. I just like the band. I know a fair amount of, and I've definitely read some books, but I don't know them. Like, I don't know the backstory of them the way I know the backstory of the Stones or the Who or whatever, which I really
Mm.
know, the Doors back, like back and forth. Um, But yeah, I think whereas I think Keith Moon was the only person saying let Keith sing.
I have that Keith Moon record. It's
This
called Two
solo,
Sides of the Moon.
yeah,
Do you know? Do you remember that record?
yeah. I don't. I never had
Oh,
it. I never had it, but I
yeah,
know it. Yeah. So
it's not good.
yeah,
Let's just say that.
yeah.
This one, this one probably doesn't mean much to you, but I'm curious to know if you were a fan of these guys. There was a guy named Jerry Miller who was in Moby Grape.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Yep.
Okay,
Yeah, I
so
was just watching one of the documentaries I was watching was San Francisco Sounds, and Moby Grape. So I went and listened to some Moby Grape after I saw it because they were good.
they
Um,
were very good.
they were really good, and part of the problem was, according to documentary, their record company hyped them so much that there was a
There was a backlash.
backlash. Yeah,
Yes,
and they didn't.
yes. They somewhat self-destructed because they
Yeah,
when that first record of theirs came out
yeah,
in 1967,
yeah,
basically everybody was looking at that as like, the greatest rock
yeah.
record,
They're like
one of the
they're the next
best
Rolling
ever.
Stones. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
Um,
they just never really held it together, and they put out a couple decent records after that,
yep.
but they never reached the heights of that first record again. And so that's interesting that you would just recently start checking them out. Were they on your radar much before then, before
I
you
knew the
saw that
name,
movie?
obviously. A name like Moby
Sure.
Grape, you know the name. And I'm sure I'd heard a song here or there, but had never really given them much of a listen. And so that's the great thing about the documentary. As soon as I was done, went right to Spotify and listened to the first album. Really liked it quite a bit.
Hmm. It's
Um,
great. Um,
it's if I'd picked it up, I could have randomly picked it up back in my record shopping days, and I just never did. If I had, it would have. I definitely would have turned me on to them back then. So,
Great,
uh,
great rock record, the self-titled first one. And also, just a little anecdote about his death. Excuse me. He died in Tacoma, Washington, which is my town of birth,
oh,
of all places. Um, anyway, this was for me probably the biggest one as far as impact out of all the deaths from last year is um, Martin Phillips, who was the leader of the band The Chills, um, which I don't think you really have
I
explored The Chills, but they seem
no.
like a band you would love. They're from New Zealand,
Yeah.
and they started putting out records in the very, very early 80s, maybe the tail end of the 70s.
That's what I was gonna say. The '70s. That's what I thought because I know them. I mean, I don't know them, but I know the name. So
Um, they their original records were on a label called Flying Nun, which is a somewhat legendary or record label from New Zealand.
yeah,
That the Chills were one of the main bands. There's a few other bands who are considered in the same legendary way as the Chills, um, but they put out a bunch of records, or a handful, late 70s, early 80s, into the 90s, where they had a record called Submarine Bells, which was on Slash, the same label as X,
yeah.
and it's just a masterpiece. The record, and for somebody who likes lyrics as much as you do, it just seems like the sort of thing that would be in your wheelhouse. I would recommend you checking out that if you want to check them out, that's the place to start. But what's interesting about this band and Martin Phillips in general, he out of people who you would never expect to be hardcore heroin addicts.
Mm,
In the I think it was in the early 90s, he picked up a heroin habit, and the Chills were basically out of commission for maybe 15 years or something like